All right, y'all. So we're finally hitting the ground with some code. Well, we kind of think so anyway. So first things first, little preparation for this video series. If you want to follow along, we're going to go to our MySQL database, our workbench, our server, and we're going to make a new and simple schema to show how little we can get away with to make this work. Because you can add this concept, this authentication steps to your Chirper full stack labs, your blog full stack labs, your final projects, and anything else y'all want to do CRUD app-wise in the future. This is a really good fundamental thing to know. So you would think that you would need several tables in your database and stuff like that, but that's only if you're taking a stateful approach. Because we're taking a stateless approach, we actually have very minimal setup we actually need for this demonstration. So if you're adding this to one of your projects, it'll be pretty easy. If you're trying to follow along with me for this series, by all means, do so. We're going to make a new schema. We're going to call it create schema auth_demo. Or, I'm going to call it the same thing as I called it in YouTube. How about the key to auth? Because I have a bad habit of forgetting what I call these things. So the key to auth, that way I know what schema this thing goes to. We're going to create it and then go ahead and use it as well to make sure that the queries we're going to run are going to execute on that and not another schema. I'm going to create one table because that's all we need. This is going to be our users table. Now you have that in your Chirper full stack labs. You're probably going to be calling it a users table in your final projects. And in your blogs table, which the lab is going to ask you to add this feature to, it's called authors. At the end of the day, the table name doesn't matter. This table is simply going to represent a user that registers to our project or our application, and this is where their profile information, their email and their password mostly, is going to exist, and that's all we really care about. So in this case, I'm going to make an ID column that is an integer that is going to auto-increment itself for ease of use today. I'm going to make an email column that's going to be a varchar60. Why not? It's going to be required to register, and I'm going to make it unique so the same email can't register more than one time. And I'm going to store their password. We can call this a hashed column as well, because technically we're not going to be storing plain text passwords as long as you know what that means. I'm going to go ahead and just call it the password column though anyway, and we're going to make sure it's at least a varchar60, because we talked about in the previous video how hashes have a fixed output length, so we don't have to worry about that kind of information in there. So moving on. Also required, and then just so we have it, maybe when they register. So then we're going to do timestamp default to the current timestamp, which can also be done as now parentheses in MySQL. Something very, very simple. This email will have to be looked up for someone to log in. Whatever password they're trying to log in with needs to be compared against what they have here. And if both those things check out, that's considered a valid login. And that's as simple as this can get. So more than likely, your chirps table already has these things. Maybe you have to add a password column. In your authors table of your blog labs, again, where you're going to have to add authentication to for the course, you can just use your existing authors table and maybe add email and password if they're not already there. So all you have to do is make sure you have at least these two columns. You can even use a username instead of an email, but we're going to be focusing on email logins here. But you can definitely set it up to work with the usernames instead. Either way, some kind of username or email for whatever project you're adding this to, and some kind of password that we're going to be storing in the database. And that's quite literally it. I forgot to specify my primary key. I got a little red X down here going, what did I forget? So primary key is going to be the ID column. My bad. There we go. I forgot something. Execute. Now it works. We're going to insert a user down the line because I'm not even going to pretend to insert a user with a plain text password as I talked about in the previous video. No, 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 no. We're going to eventually use bcrypt to generate ourselves a password and come over here and insert it into our users table. That's what we're going to be doing. Okay, with that in mind, we also have to create some kind of user to connect to this thing. So this is not a user for our users table. This is a user for our SQL server to make sure that we can connect to it with our MySQL library over in Node. So we're going to make that user real quick. Create user. I'm going to call it auth demo at localhost. So remember, this is the connection we're going to be using to run queries to this schema from Node. This is not a user as in someone that goes in our users table, FYI, all right? This is a user for these schemas, not for this project table right here. Keep that in mind. We're going to have to make sure we write identified with MySQL native password. This is an issue with MySQL 8.0 default settings compared to So MySQL 8.0, if you have 8.0, uses a different hashing algorithm than the old 5.x series did. And because the library we use in Node expects the 5.7 hashing function, we have to make sure we create this user with the old school hashing function and not the new school one. That way it actually works in our code base. So that's what we're going to add identified with MySQL native password. By, I'm going to make my password the same name, which is auth_demo. Like that. We're going to execute that command. We got a green check mark. Now, just because we created the user doesn't mean it has any kind of privileges. It can't just run whatever queries it wants to run. So we're going to give it all the privileges we want. So I'm going to say on the key to auth, give it all privileges. No comma there. To this user at localhost. And whenever you do any kind of privilege changes, it's a good idea to pretty much hard refresh that information, which is what this command pretty much does. And there we go. That should give us a user we can connect to in our database. So let's go ahead and wire that part up. From here, anyone that's a student that already has this part set up in their Chirper lab, their blog lab, or their project, we're going to be just installing the MySQL library. I'm not going to have any documentation on it because it's going to be in a different part of the course in a different video series. But I will talk about coding out that query function and just kind of ramble out loud to myself step by step what I'm doing. So for those of you that want to watch this, go for it. But the rest of this video will be simply going to our server-side code and setting up that DB folder with its index file where we import our MySQL thing and also set up our query function, for example, right? So let's go ahead and dive on into that. And again, feel free to skip around in this video to see if there's anything I talk about or do that you want to know. But if you already had that DB folder, unless you want to rewatch it to practice your fundamentals, feel free to probably skip to the next video where I'll include a configuration file to prepare for auth stuff. So new folder, DB, like we always do, index.ts. Inside of here, I'm going to import, I actually haven't installed anything yet. So JK Lamau, we're going to head back over here and we're going to npm install MySQL and the typings for MySQL as well. Like that. There we go. Oh, I forgot something. Always something. Make sure that installs just fine with no errors. Yay! Now I can write import asterisk as MySQL from MySQL. I'm going to say const pool, Paul equals MySQL.create pool takes an object. Our host is our local host. This user property is the user I had just made over here, auth_demo. I'll just copy and paste it to make sure I don't mistype it. The password was the same thing, so I'm just going to copy and paste that property. And then the database that we're connecting to and running queries on will be called the key to auth, that schema I made. That's that database property. There's that little tidbit there. I'm going to write my utility function. I'm going to export it out. Provide that type right there. This is how I want to do it. Here we go. There we go. Okay. This is going to return that new JavaScript promise. This way we can wrap our callback query function with that resolve and reject syntax, which makes it a little bit extra work now for some ease of use later, so we can run queries over and over and over again without having to write the same, getting stuck in callback hell, for example. So we're taking the time to wrap our pool.query callback and a promise to, well, make our code easier to read and write later on. It will take whatever query string we want to run and some array or object, again, that's not a good strong type, but it works for now, of value. So I can say run this query, apply any escape values if they're there, and then if there's an error or results, we're going to run our statements. We can say if else, if there's an error, reject with the error from this promise, otherwise resolve with its results. There we go. Okie dokie artichoke. We got that part written out now. It means we're connected to our database, so we'll be good to go. Whenever I want to start using this query function, I can build out a queries folder where inside of here, I'll go ahead and place a users.ts file because that's the only table I have and the only table I'll be running queries on. So I'll go ahead and set up what I think I'm going to need. So up one from the index file, I'm going to prepare an exported default object that has nothing in it quite yet. That way over here, I can go ahead and bring it in, users from my users queries, and then from this file, daisy chain up as db.users. Whatever I code up in here. So there we go. There's that little part written out right there. All right. So hopefully everyone stuck around at this point, because I realized telling some people to skip probably wasn't a good idea, given that I now have to talk about what query we're probably going to need. So, you know, if someone had skipped this video and then they realize I have a query written in the next one, they'll know to come back to this one and see what they missed. So I'm going to code the one we're going to need, because we can get away with actually 2 queries, but people will be interested to see how to make a register style query. Man, I overcomplicate these things, don't I? So I like how I'm thinking and brainstorming out loud on a recording that I intend to upload to YouTube and our course in general. So let's go ahead and figure this one out. So I'm going to make this one called a find query. And it's going to do something kind of cool. So I'm going to go ahead and prepare my string and my escape array, because it does need to escape some values, and go ahead and wire up my find functionality right there. So, all right. We're going to leave this blank for now, because again, like some of the students that probably thought they didn't need this video probably skipped it, and I realized it was a bad idea. So we're going to leave that empty for now, but that's the one we're going to want. Its ultimate purpose is going to be finding somebody's email in our database for us. And at some point, we're going to want an insert function as well, is because, well, that's when we're going to have to insert or register our users. So I'm going to go ahead and just prepare those 2 bits like that and have them exported out so we can talk about filling them in at a later time. So that's the little project setup I have right there for my database index, my users queries as well. I'm going to go ahead and make a models folder, inside of which I'm going to have possibly some interfaces that represent my tables. So I have a users table interface, had an ID as a number property, it had an email as a string property, it had a password as a string property, and it had a created at. Now, if I'm running a query of any kind, then on top of that, not all these things could be selected, because I could say select just the ID, or select just the email, or just the password. So this model is going to just tell us a best guess estimate of what the query could possibly return in. So a select statement is always going to get an array of this object. That's what our find function is going to get. So I'm going to go ahead and wire that one up. Users table from up1 into the models folder. And then this query is going to resolve with a users table array. Because remember, select statements always return arrays of objects. And an insert statement has a model that has a couple, it has an object response that looks like this. I'm going to call it the MySQL response. And it has affected rows. How many rows in a statement affects. And it also has what ID did it insert, because that could be a number, yeah, like that. And actually, these are always going to be on there no matter what. So those are the 2 properties that the insert, update, and delete statements normally do. So we're going to go ahead and toss that one on there as the generic for this one to say, bring in the MySQL response, and that's going to be what we expect right there. There we go. Cool. All right, so that scaffolds that out for ourselves right there. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and scaffold out our env. So some folks might have skipped this one, so I'm probably going to start it up here. So the next video that starts for setting up our configuration, they'll see this and maybe jump back here to see what I added before they get ahead of themselves. Or I'll probably talk about this over there as well. So ta-ta for now. And this one is not as exciting, but again, I'm trying to make these small and modular and repeatable and fun, rather than one hour and a half slog of all this stuff, which I've sometimes done in the past. So